Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry about the technical mishap. Thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to be here with you today. Growing food is very simple and fun, and this workshop is going to be super helpful, whether this is the first time you've ever started thinking about gardening or if you've already got things growing at home. We're thrilled to have gardener extraordinaire Gary Pilarchik here with us from the Rested Garden to show us and guide us through the steps that you need to have a garden at home, regardless of what season you're growing in or what kind of space you have at home. This workshop is being hosted in collaboration with the Community Ecology Institute, an environmental nonprofit based in Columbia, Maryland. And our mission is to cultivate communities where people and nature thrive together. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at CEI, and Gary is one of our amazing board members. We are so thankful to Seda for organizing and coordinating this workshop. The proceeds from this workshop are being used by Seda to help communities in need in Argentina. Now more than ever, poverty is hitting communities, especially remote places in Salta in Argentina, where people are struggling in extreme conditions. Seda has partnered with Fundación Pueblos Nativos, who work with high altitude communities to build greenhouses. The greenhouses that the proceeds from this workshop are going towards are going to enable people in these communities to grow healthy vegetables and food that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And this is so incredibly important. Having healthy green foods in your life and in your diet lead to a more robust and healthy lifestyle. So thank you for supporting this workshop and for helping these people, and also signing up to learn how to garden, which is super exciting and super important. With that being said, we can get started. So we're going to start with an intro to gardening. We are also going to walk around Gary's garden, show you all a bunch of different aspects that have to do with gardening, and we will get to all of your questions. During the workshop portion, I'll be answering some questions and asking them to Gary that you guys put in the Q&A section. You can ask them in Spanish or in English, and we will also have a designated Q&A section at the very end where we will answer all of your questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and with that, I'll let Gary take it away.
So I just want to stress again, thanks so much for helping support building the Andean vegetable garden greenhouses. I think it's really important. And what I love about gardening is that we're all the same across all countries, languages. Gardeners are the same. They're wonderful people. And I've spent a good 20 years just teaching people how to have gardens. And that's what we're going to do today. We'll go over the overview. I'll show you how to plant some of the summer vegetable seeds that you got. And I'm going to spend a good 60 minutes answering questions. So please just put the questions out there. We'll get to that. The most important thing is a garden wants to give. So if you haven't gotten started gardening at all, get started, because it's going to give back to you. There's a bit of a learning curve, but we're going to cover all the basics so that you can get started. And then we'll walk through my property. We'll look at different gardens and see what kind of fits your need. Most importantly, start small, get your hands dirty, and just go ahead and get started. That's the biggest barriers. People think about it, they watch a lot of YouTube videos, they read a lot of books, but they're hesitant to get started. But once you get started, you're going to catch the gardening bug, and I think you will really enjoy it. And even in the worst gardening season of your life, if everything fails, something's going to give back to you. So you're going to get a harvest out of your garden. So I encourage you to get started. 6 things that are needed for your garden to be successful, and then we'll go walk around and I'll show you different things that I have going on. Is that your garden needs sun. So you need 8 hours of sun. You can work with less, but you can't grow as much. So when we go out there, I'll show you how the sun tracks in my yard so that you're getting that maximum sun, 8 hours, 10 hours. You're going to have to water your garden regularly, especially if you're doing containers. I know somebody had a question about containers. I'll go over the watering for containers. You're going to have to water in the heat of June and July every day. Right now in April, maybe once or twice a week, depending on what you're growing. And as your plants get bigger, you need to care for them more. You're going to need good soil. So if you pick a spot in your yard, if it's growing weeds and grass, then it's going to grow plants. So you're good for your first year. And we'll talk about container gardening and what kind of soil goes in it. This can be really, really confusing. Nutrients, we'll cover fertilizer, compost, basics on what you need to do for that. And then you need the right growing temperature. So today we're talking more about the summer vegetable garden. And your summer crops, like when the soil, the earth, not the air around it, but the earth is about 50 degrees. And that's when you kind of get started. I think we're going to cover pepper plants, squash plants, radishes, carrots, and basil. I'm going to show you how to plant those and give you some growing examples that are in the garden. And then finally, if that was five, was that five? I don't know. I might have skipped one. But the sixth thing, and probably the most important thing, is the gardener. You count is what your garden needs. You get to create your own garden landscape. You get to kind of build on a blank canvas, and you get to create earth sculptures, which I consider the miracle of seeds. I can take a handful of seeds, and when we walk my property, I can fit that entire garden in my hand. And that's what I hope to pass on to you, kind of pass on that passion and that bug. With that being said, let's walk over to the garden and start talking.
Yeah, awesome. This is live from Gary's garden.
Start with the size of the garden that you can manage. And getting started is the biggest barrier. Creating a garden or starting with a garden that's too big, I probably. This is my main garden. We're going to walk through here. Don't feel like you have to have a garden that looks like this. We're going to go over examples on the other side. I have a smaller garden. I have a container garden over there. And if you look at these towers, that's a vertical garden, which has tons of plants packed in there. And that's just a small footprint. If you look at the deck down there, that's something that you could do too. There's containers right down here. The things to keep in mind is that you want to pick the garden size that works for you, because you're going to have to be able to manage it without feeling overwhelmed. A lot of people work. You're doing this around a 40-hour week. You're going to have to water your garden 3 or 4 times a week, depending on what you're growing, how big the plants are in the season. For instance, these containers I can get away with now in April, watering twice a week. When the heat comes in for the summer in July and August, sometimes you have to water every day, even twice a day. So I want you to keep that in mind too. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll have ideas of how you want to get started. You're going to have to manage your weeds 2 times a week. You're going to hopefully be harvesting. So you'll be harvesting every other day once everything gets up and swinging in later June, July, and August. And the larger the garden is, the more time you're going to need. So, let's just think about, starting small. Now, before we get into the types, I know everybody got a packet of seeds. I want to just show you how to plant them, because sometimes that's a barrier too. Now, this is my planting station. You don't need anything fancy like this. What you need is a cup or container like this. And what I'm going to be talking about is just starting these plants outdoors. So they can't take a frost. They don't like 40-degree temperatures. So you can start these in your house, but you can't really grow them on a windowsill. That's a mistake a lot of people make. They put seeds into here. It starts growing on the windowsill, but it's not enough light, and your plants get really tall and skinny and leggy, and that's because of lack of light. The way to get around it is you start now, you bring these in at night when it's still 40 degrees, and then you bring them back out during the day. So they're getting the sun and the warmth at night. And it's pretty straightforward. Squash seeds are summer crops, and you want to plant 2 in a container just like this. This is a potting mix. That's just a basic potting mix. I'll be talking about the different soils. It gets really confusing when you go to like your big box stores of what to buy, because you have topsoil, raised bed soil, potting soil, container soil. For your containers, you want a potting mix or a container mix. And you're going to put in 2 squash seeds or zucchini seeds, and you just press them down about an inch. Don't worry so much about the depth. They want to grow. Cover it over. You water it in. That's how quickly you can start the squash seeds. Now, you can plant these directly in your containers. You can plant them directly in your garden, depending on where you're watching from. Like I get 6 months of good weather, so I can start these right in the garden. But if you're in a place where maybe you get 3 months of warm weather, you might want to get these started in containers. It's really up to you. And it's kind of fun to do this. You can also plant cucumbers the same way. That's your standard summer crop. I like to put in 2 or 3 seeds, because you don't want to be waiting for 1 seed to germinate and it doesn't come up. Put in 2 or 3, and you're going to thin these down later to just 1 plant when you go out to the garden, and you just cover it over. The other plants, now I have some examples. Let me think if I have any here. Well, I have some pepper plants too. You can buy pepper transplants or tomato transplants. They work well. They can be a little bit more expensive. These are pepper seeds. If you want to start pepper seeds, same thing is you're just going to put in, let's see, we have the cucumbers in there. You're going to put in 2 pepper seeds, 3 pepper seeds if you want. The squash, the cucumbers, you put them down about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Pepper seeds, just about a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. Don't overstress about the depth. Cover it up. And these are 3 wonderful summer crops. Tomato seeds would be planted the same way. We're also going to plant the radishes and carrots. Now, radishes and carrots tend to like the cool weather. And you can actually grow radishes and carrots in a flower box. This flower box is, what is that? 5 inches maybe? 6 inches?
6 inches.
6 inches of soil. You just want enough depth so that the root system will go down to the bottom, have room to grow. And to do radish seeds, it's really, really simple. You press in just a couple of finger holes, maybe 2 inches apart, something like that. Drop in 2 seeds per hole. Again, you don't want to be waiting for 1 seed to germinate. And you just drop them in like that. Cover them over. We'll water everything in a second. When the radishes get to about this height, you should have 2 of them. If they both germinate, remove 1, and then you're good to go. And we've got the radish examples in there. And then just real quick, carrots would be the same way. These are short carrots, so if you're planting in a 6-inch space, you want carrots that don't get beyond 6 inches. And it's the same exact thing. About 2 inches apart. Carrot seeds are really, really small, and they can take,
can't even see them.
yeah,
That's pretty awesome.
Up to 21 days to germinate. So carrots like to be planted really early. So we kind of missed the window now, but you plant them maybe in the beginning of March, but you can plant these again in September, let them overwinter in certain zones. So you can get 2 harvests out of them. But it's just 2 seeds in a hole. That was 3. And then you would just cover them over. When they come up and they're about this tall, you thin them down to 1. Now, just real quick, and then let's get into the garden. You have radishes will come up within about 5 days to 7 days. Your squash, zucchini, cucumbers will come up quickly too. So you're going to see these germinate much more quickly than the carrot seeds. All right. So the other plant which they don't have seeds for, this is basil. Basil is 100% warm weather crop. They like 50-degree nights. They like 70 to 80-degree days. And the whole key to basil is you set it up just like this. Go ahead. Sorry, got my hand in the way. Just press a little hole in there, 2 or 3 basil seeds, cover it over. And you can start your basil just like this if it's not ready to go out into the garden. Same thing. You would bring these out during the day, bring them at night. And again, the reason that you jumpstart, kind of try and get a jump start to the season, is because you're growing the transplants so that you can get them into the ground sooner. For instance, if we put basil seeds into the ground now when the nights are 40, those seeds may sit there 7 days, 10 days, 14 days, 21 days. Even though you put the seeds in the ground, they haven't germinated. So you do this kind of trick, move them in and out of the house, they germinate sooner, and then you can start harvesting all this stuff sooner. Let me just give these a quick water. Every container that you have should always have holes in it. If the water fills up, there's no drainage holes. You can see them. So for instance, if you want to kind of repurpose yogurt cups or water bottles, just make sure you poke holes in them. If the water sits in the bottom, it's going to cause root rot and it's going to kill your plants off. And the same thing, when we get to bigger containers, you have to have holes in them.
So do these just have holes drilled in the bottom?
Yeah, well, I constructed it, so it's a little shoddy. So there's a lot of cracks in there. So all the water drains out of there. All right, so let's.
So if someone is worried about overwatering or underwatering, what's a good tip, especially when you're trying to start out seeds?
So because you have holes in the bottom and because you're using a potting mix or a container mix, that naturally drains really, really well. So you can't really overdo it. Now, here's an example. That's a good question. So here's examples of plants that were all seeded doing basically what I just showed everybody. Rosemary is a plant that everybody loves, and it's a little more, I don't remember if it came out of like the Greece area or not, but the soil there is a little more sandy. It's a little more well draining, and they do like less water. So even though rosemary drains well, you want to water rosemary less, almost to the point where you think you're not giving it enough water. If not, the rosemary ends up looking like that, and then like that. So less is better for rosemary and lavender.
Well, and also this shows that even Gary sometimes makes some. Yeah.
I don't put it on video. So it looks okay. And then you can see same process is these were grown outdoors. I do a lot of videos on setting up grow lights indoors and all that. You don't have to do that. You can plant in these little cells. That spinach, it's a little beat up. The lettuce is beautiful. And same thing is you plant these cells, you put them out during the day, you bring them in at night until the temperatures get right. But once the temperatures are in the upper 40s and 50s, all these plants can still be out here. And one of the things that I think is interesting when we were talking about the extreme conditions of the Andean greenhouse and why we want to do that. And my understanding is the nights can frost and the days are nice. So we just had frost 2 days ago. It killed out my garden. So without really having that kind of greenhouse or having a stable environment, it's really, really hard to grow your food. After me?
Yeah.
Let me just
Look at how awesome these are.
Yeah. So that's the vertical garden.
And so these are really great if you don't have a lot of space, but you want to grow a lot. This only takes up about like a 2 by 2 foot space on a deck, which is pretty incredible that you can grow all of this. I think you said that each of these rows has about 7 gallons worth of soil.
So when you're growing vertically, you want to have a lot of material, basically. And you can see here's another example of potting mix. That's a raised bed mix. We'll talk a little bit about that. But when you're doing anything that's in a container, you want that potting mix or container mix. When you go to a store, you're going to see all these crazy names and stuff like that. Just go to the cheapest potting mix, cheapest container mix. It's basically all the same ingredients, just packaged differently, and you fill it up. So one example for a garden would be vertical garden. There are 6 pockets in here, 7 gallons in each. This is my leafy greens. That's parsley. These are pansies. You can actually eat pansy flowers. And this is just getting started. These are more cool weather crops. The cool weather crops can actually take a freeze. Over there where you were. These are all different oak leaf lettuces. You can do a whole tower that'd be 6 times 5, 30 pockets of lettuce, and you could actually come out, cut off leaves, and have a salad every night based on what you're growing in here. And that's all in a really small footprint. And this is a great way to start. Up here are strawberries. What's cool about strawberries is they will send out runners, and then you just tuck the runner into these pockets when the lettuce is done. And eventually this will fill out from a few plants of all strawberry plants. And strawberries will survive through the winter. These are the pepper plants.
So sorry, would you also start something like strawberries in those containers like you just showed? How would you start those?
You can. So what we were kind of going over the warm weather crops,
Gotcha.
which tend to really grow quickly. Strawberry plants can take 21 days to germinate. So they're a little more fickle and more difficult. This is a frost casualty, even though they recovered. In here, for example, we'll be talking about size of containers. So pepper plants can be grown in a smaller container. So in each one of these, there are 3 pepper plants. I have actually grown 6. If you go all the way around, there's 6. But you can grow 3 pepper plants in each level. That's 15 pepper plants in this small space. It could be hot peppers, sweet peppers, it doesn't matter. You can mix them together. But this is just a great way to do all of that. And just real quick too, here's the third way to do it. These are all herbs. These are all grown by seed. This is oregano. Down here is parsley. This is chives. Here's sage, which is wonderful in chicken. These chives are actually going to flower, and they're completely edible. They'll be nice pink flowers. Back here is lavender, and then finally thyme. And you could, in theory, just do this whole thing in herbs. And these herbs are perennial. And a perennial plant means it can take the freeze here in Maryland, comes back strong. So these were all planted at least a year or 2 years ago. And they just come back on their own. You just cut them back to the ground, and then you have all these great herbs. And this is a great way to get started. Let's go down all the way to the other end, and we'll talk about containers if you want to get started that way. Well, let's stop here, actually.
There's so much to look at.
So, and again, I want to try and keep the talk here for about 45 minutes and spend as much time as needed to answer everybody's questions. So if you look in here, these are radishes.
I tried one earlier, and it was the best radish I've ever had in my entire life.
So these are French breakfast radishes. And once they germinate, like you'll see on the seed packet, it might say matures in 28 days. It's after germination. So if you put these in and it's too cold, it's not 28 days from when you put the seed in the ground. It's 28 days to maturity after it breaks the surface. And that can be confusing to people when you look at the seed packet. You guys can eat these. So those are French breakfast radishes. These are the radishes I just planted. They're more the round radish. It's either a cherry bell or something different. And then in here, we have these long white radishes. So each plant that we go through has different varieties of different types. And these are cool season crops, which means these leaves can actually freeze. These are pea plants, by the way. So your cool weather crops go in March in our area. They can take a frost, they can freeze, the cell structure doesn't get destroyed. But those warm weather crops that we just planted, they need warmth, or they're just gonna sit there and shiver. And this is actually, I mean, this bed here is 2.5 feet wide, about 6 feet long, 8 inches deep, filled with raised bed soil. I actually kind of make that's a little beyond the scope of what we're doing now. But you could just put in a raised bed soil, or you can, fill it how you want. But this is a great starting bed too. This is nice, cool weather crops. These will come out, and then you could put pepper plants into here. This trellis here, we'll talk about trellising.
Here, a little better.
Okay. Up here, we'll have trellising. You can grow cucumbers right through there. So you can transition your garden over as you get practice with cool weather crops first, warm weather crops after that. Now, if we walk too far away, are we going to lose the signal if we go down there?
Well, let's find out.
Okay. So those are more raised beds. Those were vertical containers. If you want to keep it simple, if you look down here, nothing's in here yet because I'm waiting for those plants to mature. You can just turn your earth over and plant into that. You can add in different amendments. We'll talk about fertilizer, but you don't have to spend a lot of money and construct raised beds. You don't have to buy expensive containers. You can just do a strip like this, and we can literally put in 1, 2 squash plants, 4 or 5 pepper plants, 2 tomato plants. And this might be, if you take a look at it from this angle, this might be just perfect for somebody getting started. This is the same idea. This one's functional. These are potatoes. They got a little beat up from the frost. And then we have broccoli, broccoli, red cabbage, collard greens, more potatoes. And again, you rotate your plants through cold weather, warm weather, and so on. If you stand here, you could go ahead and have a raised bed, or a container garden. These are fabric pots. The beauty of fabric pots is they don't need holes. They naturally drain. They come in different sizes. I think that's 100 gallons. This is 10 gallons. And you can see some of the loss in here when that frost rolled in. So this is about a 100-gallon container. Lettuce is right in here. And there were 6 peppers in here. Only 1 survived, all covered the same, but the frost killed off 5 other ones. But you can see you can cram in a lot of plants. I have potatoes growing in the 10-gallon pots. And then looking across, we had the herbs growing in the vertical containers. You can grow them just like this. This is peas. And again, this is about 10 gallons, which I think, what is that, about 40 liters? I think that's how it gets worked out. So you can grow peas in there, collard greens, 2 plants, parsley, rosemary, those are flowers, oregano back there. And then these are 5-gallon pots. That is mint and lemon balm, which make great teas, and you can use in chicken dishes and stuff like that. You can purchase raised beds that are already framed, just like here. You drop them in, you fill it with soil, and I have my cool weather crops in there now. And it's beautiful. I love the red lettuces. We have arugula. And again, sadly, a tomato plant that didn't make it.
So again, don't be discouraged if something happens. It happens to the best of us.
It happens. And that's the thing with the warm weather crops. You're really waiting for the soil to be 50 degrees. And you do want to wait till the frost is out of your zone, which is usually May 15th, but every year I try and push it. These are just tubs that you can get at Home Depot. That's all cilantro in here and 22 gallons. You would have to drill a couple of holes in there, but you can plant in that. So you can use that on a porch, patio, deck, whatever you want. This is, I think, the best way. These are fire rings. So if you go to buy a fire ring and you would just burn wood in it, you drop it in your yard, it might be, say, whatever, $40. If you go to a gardening store and buy a raised bed that looks like that, now you're paying $70 for the same thing. So you can go to different places in Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, or find different ways to buy a frame and just repurpose it. So you have to find that under a fire ring, but you can use it for planting. And that's all spinach in there. Again, another cool weather crop. And it's growing really, really well. And then, oh, here's actually one of my favorite ways to grow. And then we'll pop over to one more garden. The sad loss of all my sweet peppers. Let me pull this one up. So a lot of times people are on a budget and you want to spend as little money as possible, but have a great garden. These are just repurposed pots that I get from friends and family. And there's a nice big worm. You can see that the bottom is cut out. So what you're doing is you're allowing the roots of your pepper plants to grow into the ground, but you're putting all your good resources right in here. And I've been growing peppers like this probably for 10 years. And the tip that I have for peppers is a lot of times too, when you read online or you're reading different things, it'll say 1 pepper plant every 2 or 3 feet. You can actually put 2 pepper plants in the same space, get almost double production, and you're getting more. And if you look down here, I think 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, let's just say 15, there's about 30 pepper plants in this small footprint. And it's not maybe what, 12 inches across? And I think anybody could really do that. You can't grow everything like this. We'll talk about containers when we go over to the other side. Let's just go to a smaller garden and then we'll go to the container garden and then progress from there.
Awesome.
Let's go out this side. So inside, every garden is going to have its own issues with animals. So this is kind of built because we have deer around here. I've never had a deer jump in. When you're building a garden, you don't need massively high fences for deer. You can plant just like this along there. A deer, like a person, if they're going to leap, they don't want to land on something where they can break a leg, basically. So if you fill your garden with different raised beds on, well, I guess sort of the perimeter, but right along the fence line, deer aren't going to want to naturally jump in. However, I did have somebody tending my garden. They left the gate open. The deer did walk in and had a party in there. Yeah. Other examples of gardens, raised beds. You can buy metal raised beds. This is, and then on the outside, this is garlic, onions, leeks, all things deer don't like to eat. And then you can see a couple more examples. And then this is a perfect size. I'm not really great with remembering the measurements, but that might be 12 or maybe 10 by 16 or 18. Anyway, this garden was set up without digging anything. So you don't have to put a lot of work into setting up your gardens. You basically lay down cardboard on the inside. kill off all the weeds, and it looked just something like this. I'm in the process of doing some work out here. But instead of putting wood chips on there, you put 4 to 6 inches of good compost down, and you can plant right into that. And the cardboard kills out the weeds. The plants grow through the cardboard into the ground. Your compost feeds the plants, and you have a garden set up just like that. We're going to walk over there to the left. And I think for people that have questions, ask really specific questions about containers or the garden types that you want. I'll be glad to answer them. I know this can be overwhelming. I mean, if you look from here, it's a ton of garden space, but you really just need something small. And I think once you catch the bug, you're going to really, really like it. This is my compost area. You don't need compost. It's great. Don't be overwhelmed by this, but we'll talk about that shortly. So my house was built in 1867. So it's about 2 acres here, but it was the main house on all this acreage of farm. So when we moved in, a lot of people, moved, come and gone. This was fencing from the 70s that I found in the woods. So I kind of just repurposed it. And this is a nice little cottage garden. Nothing's really planted yet. Again, I'm waiting for the warm season, but you can frame up. This is a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed. Wood's a little bit expensive now due to COVID and all that kind of stuff, but wood prices should come down, will come down. You can go to Home Depot, ask them to cut a board in half for you, an 8-foot board into a 4-foot piece. So you don't even have to do any sawing really. You can just get it cut at Home Depot or Lowe's, screw it together, nail it together, fill it up, and you have a raised bed. And if you frame out a space like this, which is about 16 by 16, maybe you just start with one bed, add in another bed. Eventually over there, you can see a vertical container of strawberries, the terracotta color. Throw in some containers, be it fabric pots or plastic pots, and you can kind of work up to speed. Now, I talked about if you don't have a lot of sun, I want to show you a mushroom garden real quick. This is all being grown because of the shade up here. And different mediums, hay, wood pellets, and stuff like that. Containers again, and these are actually oyster mushrooms, and you can see that are starting to pop. And as soon as it warms up a little bit more rain comes, I'm going to be able to harvest oyster mushrooms. So you can grow other things besides vegetables just by setting this up. And I think this is a good angle too. If you're setting up your first garden, my son, can you see my hand in there? Rises all the way over there, and then it tracks all the way around right over our head. It goes all the way out to the garage. And you might have to come out when you're picking out your garden space at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 p.m., 2 p.m., every couple of hours, and watch how the sun tracks. And that's how you can figure out what space is getting that 8 hours or 10 hours of sun. And when you're doing it in maybe March or April, your trees may not have leaves on them. So you have to kind of take into account shadows falling. All right, should we do one more garden type? I want to show the containers over on the other side. Well, while we're here, let's talk about compost. So compost does 2 things. It feeds your garden plants. It gives it nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So you have your main macronutrients, which are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then you have your second level one, which is calcium, magnesium. Wait, I know it. It'll come to me. I have it in the notes. Why did I forget that? Anyway, it's 6 of them. So what compost does is it gives you a low supply of those sulfur. It's sulfur. It gives you a low supply of nutrients. And this is truly what organic gardening is. It's taking your resources from your area, grass, leaves, breaking it down into compost and using it. It's not necessarily going out and buying organic products. That's good, but I don't want people to overspend thinking they have to buy that organic stamp. So if you have the room, this was filled with leaves that I just raked up, collected through in here. Over the winter, they've fallen this far. In 6 more months, they'll be leaf compost. They'll be great to go. I can mix that with fresh grass clippings like I did over here. And I do that now every year. And this is my compost. This is 2 years old. This is nicely finished compost. This is almost a year old. It's almost done. And this allows you to have fertilizer and feed for your garden without spending a lot of money. The other thing that it does is it feeds the soil. So even if you're using organic granular fertilizers and different things in there, your soil life, your worms, microbiology want all this organic matter. And it's really, really important. It conditions your soil, it holds water, your plants will love you for it. But I wasn't able to grow compost for years till I moved here. So don't feel like you have to run out and do that. This is a dog pen that I got off of Amazon 3 years ago. These are all weeds and refuse that came out of the garden. So the stuff down here is good to go, but I haven't even used it yet. So I just throw it in here. So my recommendation for compost is to just try and get it started. If you can get just a little pen going like this, start composting. If you can't do it, that's okay. Maybe, you do it another time. Well, let's go around. The other strategy too, is this is more formal garden. This is another space here, and we can stop here. But the taller plants are all fruit trees. So you can incorporate, that's a smaller one I just put in. You can incorporate fruit trees into your area. This is what happens to oregano when it's in the ground. So you can use this in your kitchen too. That's thyme, bee balm, but you can plant fruit crops, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries. We walk by the blueberries over there, but I have some over here. This is the other garden. And I want to say these are goji berries. And I think that's right. Yeah, but they're goji berries. And they grow really well. They came from just a little cutting like this that you get at Home Depot for $9. They're into their third year. The fruit's not amazingly tasty, but it's really nutritional. So mixing it into different things as well. And if we pop into here, you can see a strawberry bed. Those are raspberries over there. You can just incorporate different things into the beds. And here's a good example of my container garden. And you start with the smaller pots that might be 4 gallons, 16 liters, to 10 gallons, 40 liters, all the way to the half whiskey barrel. And the whole key is, like, we were growing cucumbers, or we started the seeds up there for squash and zucchini. Those plants need a container like the size of that whiskey barrel. So it's really important when you're doing container gardening, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this, is that you want to use a container mix or a potting mix. And when you water, you want to water slowly, even though it's in a container. Because what happens is, if the soil's dry, the water goes to the edge of the pot and soil and goes right to the bottom and drains out. So you want to make sure you soak that container mix all the way through. If you're growing tomatoes or peppers, squash, zucchini, and the soil just dries out one time, it damages the plant. They can get blossom end rot, they can have issues pulling in the calcium, and that's the hardest part of container gardening. So if you're going to do it, get larger pots than you might think. In smaller pots, you can put peas, leafy greens, kales, and stuff like that. These are all plants that overwinter. They're all going to be pulled out. This will all be replanted. But you definitely want to start with a bigger container than you might think. Do we have any questions people ask that we can answer? Because I want to walk over to some of the transplants over here.
How many potato seeds did you put in your 10-gallon fabric pots?
So I am overplanting. That's a good question, because I'm doing the potato project this year on my YouTube channel. It took me a long time to try and figure out what are early potatoes, what are late potatoes. Short version is, I put probably in a 10-gallon pot, 4 to 6 inches down. And then I added more soil and I put more on there. That's overplanting. That container can probably take 4 or 6. If you're going to the 6 seed potatoes, you're going to get smaller potatoes. But I'm really kind of experimenting. That's what I encourage people to do, is throw wisdom out the window, have fun, and take notes, because I'm doing specific varieties and I want to see how much I can cram into those pots. I'm using extra phosphorus and some potassium to really kind of get it going. Like, for instance, in a pot like this, you fill it about to here with the mix, with your container mix. And then you could press in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 potatoes, over planting, put in some more soil, and then put a couple more on top, and see how many potatoes you can get in here. The whole key would be consistent watering, consistent feeding, and you can get a whole lot done. And you can see that I've incorporated peas with flowers, and you can kind of mix things up.
What crops do you recommend for an area that only get afternoon sun?
So it depends on the amount. Afternoon sun is a little more intense, so you can get away with maybe 6 hours and still do most crops. But if it's really light starved, I would go with the leafy greens, radishes, peas, green beans will do really well. Determinate variety tomatoes. Determinate variety tomatoes get to a set height, they stop growing, set flowers and fruit, and they're done. But again, in this case, and this is like the hardest question to answer because I just don't know, I would experiment. I would get some different plants, take notes, and see how they do. And this way you'll be able to figure out, what grows in that space in your unique garden.
We covered this a bit with the fencing, but what tricks are there to keep animals and pests away from your vegetable garden? So for things like this, for example, as
Right.
you're growing things, if you don't have space to put up a really big fence, maybe if you have a balcony or something like that, what do you do to keep birds or bugs or critters from?
Right. So birds and bugs and those kind of critters are a whole different ballpark. And if you have birds that are coming, sometimes you have to use bird netting. And you can see in my house, I have feeding stations and I have a watering station for the birds. That stopped birds from pecking my tomato plants because they were thirsty. So you can feed them. But it's a hard question to answer. Rabbits need fencing. Deer often need fencing. There are products you can buy that are sprays, but they smell god awful. So they're going to keep you away from your garden too. We'll talk a little bit about diseases in a second, vine borers and stuff like that. But animal pests are really, really tough. And these are just some examples of tomato plants that are growing that I started myself. And you can see there's 2 or 3 seeds in there. They have to get thinned out to 1. And you can save yourself a lot of money because when you buy the transplant, sometimes they're $3, $4 a plant. This might have cost me $4 to do this whole tray.
So what's the importance of thinning them out? So why can you only have 1 growing in there instead of 2?
So if we pop these out, well, first of all, you want a single tomato plant planted every 2 or 3 feet apart. You don't want 2, they get massive. And that's the whole thing. Like you might think, hey, this is a cute little tomato plant and I want to grow it in a pot like this, and it does really well, but eventually the root system doesn't have enough space. That's why this needs to go into at least a 10-gallon pot or more so that you're picking the pot for the large mature plant, or you're just not going to get a lot of fruit. And even when it goes into the earth, for tomatoes, you just want to grow, I hate doing that, but you got to get rid of it. Just 1 plant.
And when do you know when it's time to take it from here into a big 10-gallon container pot?
So these could actually go, you can grow them a little more. So sometimes what you do is you start them in these small cells, and now that you see the roots are all kind of basically filling up the space, you could put it into a container like this. And then when it grows to about this size, you're ready to go put it into your garden. And
so you don't go from baby to 10-gallon.
You can, you can if it's warm. So if it's really warm, 50-degree soil temperature, warm nights, this can go out. If you put this out when the temperatures are dropping into the 40s, it's going to turn purple. It's basically going to shiver and it's just going to sit there. So that's part of the goal with the summer plants, is that you really have to put them into the soil when the soil temperature is correct. And then these are just different examples. This one's a good size. That's ready to go into the ground. All right, let me.
That's someone who says they've planted rosemary every year for several years and not been able to get it to survive. Do you have any tips for them?
Well, I can go show you my dead rosemary. So the tip is that it can take some cold and some frost, but in Maryland, at least in this zone, it doesn't always survive. But the 2 things that you can do, and this is one of the things I'm going to change, is rosemary. See, this survived a little bit. It likes well-draining soil. So I'm going to change it over from something that's heavy like this add in a lot of sand, and hope that it drains better. I'm going to put a new rosemary plant. I also put down this slate to absorb heat. I might add some more slate. So the idea is a better draining soil and a place where it holds heat. So if you're planting this, the most success I've had with rosemary is planting it on the south side of my house.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Every time she asks a question, you repeat the question so people know what question is.
Certainly.
Okay. So, what do you do when there are very strong summer rains?
What do you do when there's very strong summer rains? You can't do a whole lot. So the strategy would be is putting your garden in a place that water clears out quickly. So you still going to get the rains, but the water will move through quickly. You just don't, if you're getting severe rains, it's really easy for all that water to kind of choke out your plants, your root system of your plants. Let's talk about buying seeds real quick too. And then how are we doing on time? I mean, we could sit down and do a formal Q&A. Okay. So these are seed packs, obviously. What I want people to do is I don't want you to overspend buying seed packs. When you go and buy them, you're going to see something on here that says non-GMO. That's not on this packet, so I don't buy them. Which is a genetically modified organism. You can never buy GMO seeds in seed packs. It's big business, and you have to sign contracts and spend thousands of dollars. So when you see seed companies saying non-GMO, they never were GMO. They never will be GMO. So don't pay extra money for that. When you see organic seeds, you may want that, but organic seeds aren't healthier or better for you. And people get really mad when I say that. What's important is if you want to support a small local business, look for seed companies that are small, look online and support them that way. Seeds have been organic just about forever. The only difference between organic seeds and non-organic seeds is there's no chemical fertilizers used in the soil for 3 years. Those fertilizers don't affect the seed anyway. And then they have to keep a journal of the sprays they use. You can buy them if you want. What I most want to impress upon people is don't overspend. Know why you're spending it. So if you want to buy organic seeds, that's fine. If you want to buy non-GMO, that's fine. But you're not necessarily getting a better seed. In fact, you're not. We can go back and sit down and get ready for the Q&A. I mean, the last thing I want to talk about is fertilizers, because that's really confusing. And then we can just answer questions. So when you're buying fertilizer, if you can use compost, of course, go ahead and use that. But everybody can't make compost. So you have to buy your organic fertilizers, which I do recommend. Chemical fertilizers, let me get on my soapbox real quick. Chemical fertilizers won't hurt you. They won't hurt your garden. They don't grow an inferior plant, but they're not really needed. I use them in a very specific way, like for my damaged pepper plants or my damaged tomato plants. If they're hit by a disease or they're hit by a frost, I may use the chemical fertilizer one time, helps them bounce back. So when you buy organic fertilizer, there's two types. There's insoluble granular type. So that's like the pack you open up and it's just like grains of rice and you just sprinkle it down. It's insoluble. And that is something that has to sit in the soil. It has to break down over the months for it to be available to your plants. And that's called insoluble. You also then have water soluble. Those are the ones that you mix with a gallon of water. Those nutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, are all immediately available. So as soon as you pour that onto your plants, especially for container gardening, that plant gets the nutrients it needs. So you need two types. You need your insoluble fertilizers and you need your water soluble. Now, when you buy a bag of the granular fertilizer, this is where it gets confusing. You'll see a number on there like 5, 4, 3. The first number is nitrogen, N, P, phosphorus, K, potassium. You're just looking for any fertilizer that those numbers are around a 5, 5, 5, and you can use that in your garden. You can get like a 6, 4, 2, a 3, 5, 7 or something like that. The point is these organic fertilizers are really basically blood meal, which is blood from slaughterhouse animals, bone meal, which is crushed bone, feather meal, and then they add in different things. So you're basically buying the same product. Don't get caught with fancy labels. Like you'll see tomato fertilizer, you'll see pepper fertilizer, you'll see leafy green fertilizer. You don't need to buy 3 kinds of fertilizer, just one granular fertilizer. That will pretty much get you set up.
We've got a question about growing zones and the importance of knowing your last frost date.
All right, so I got to repeat the question, right? So the question is growing zones and the importance of knowing your last frost date. So if you want to figure out your last frost date, you can go online and you can look at weather archives. That will give you an idea when it is. So it is important because you saw that it did kill out some of my plants. So Maryland zone 7, it is May 15th is usually the last frost date. And the warm weather crops can't take the frost. So if you put in all your tomatoes and peppers, if you put in zucchini, squash, all that, frost comes, it's going to kill the leaf of the plant. So that's why it's important.
So what if someone is watching this right now and wants to go to a nursery and buy some seeds and get started today? What's their next steps?
The next steps, yeah. So if somebody wants to go to a nursery, buy some seeds and get started now, what would be the next step? So that actually brings me to this. Planting your garden, and I think this will answer the question the best. You can create an edible landscape, you can use the containers, you can use the raised bed. So the first thing is you think about what space you're going to use, because that's going to dictate what kind of seeds and what kind of plants you want to buy. And the whole idea is for you to be creative. It's your gardenscape. So I would pick plants that you enjoy eating. If you get transplants, sometimes you can be more successful with that. If you can get seeds, plant them like I showed you. But I would just pick the seeds that you like, the plants that you like, and the matching containers or the garden space to get them planted. You do want to pick up, like I just said, an insoluble granular type fertilizer with around a 555 NPK, and you want a water soluble fertilizer. And fish emulsion is a good water soluble fertilizer. But I would. You need fertilizer? You do need fertilizer in containers. So when you're planting in containers, those plants get massive and the root systems will suck the water out and the fertilizer out. So you're fertilizing those gardens more often. But most importantly is go and pick out stuff you like, take notes of when you plant it, see how it goes, and adapt year after year. That's what I do. Other questions? We can wait a few minutes if people want to think about everything that we went over.
There was a question about those summer strong.
Yeah.
And any question about cicadas? No.
So, I mean, I can tell you about cicadas. The cool thing about cicadas is they don't have mouths or teeth. So they're not going to chew up your vegetable garden. What they do is they land on your fruit trees, they scratch into the branches, the females lay eggs, and that can damage it. So if you have smaller fruit trees, that's what you have to worry about, or smaller trees, that's what you can cover. But they're not like grasshoppers or locusts, and they're not going to, chew your garden down.
How often should you fertilize plants that you're starting from seeds?
That's a very good question. So the seed, oh yeah, I got to say that again. Say it again.
How often should you fertilize plants that you're starting from seeds?
How often should you fertilize plants that you're starting from seeds? About every 14 days after they germinate and they've grown, about 10 days. And when a plant germinates, the seed coat actually feeds the plant. So you have some time for that plant to, let's just say get about that tall in 10 days. Once it gets to that point, you want to use a water soluble fertilizer. However, this is really important. In those little seed trays, it's not like being in the earth and there's no rain coming. So you can pour in too much fertilizer, overlove your plants and kill them. So whatever water soluble you're buying, I recommend cutting it down to like a quarter strength and feeding your plant that way. We good?
Thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Sure.
So we've got two similar questions. So can you repeat the name of the variety of tomatoes that you grow in a place with afternoon sun?
Yes. So what tomato would I grow where there's afternoons or less sun? So it's not a specific variety, it's a type. So you have a determinate tomato, D-E-T-R, eminent, how you spell that? It's determinate. And you have indeterminate. Indeterminate means it grows forever and it'll keep going and going and going. It'll get 6 feet, 8 feet tall. Frost or disease will kill it out. We'll also talk about diseases and pests if you remind me. So that's an indeterminate. The determinate type tomato, and the way you figure that out is sometimes it's on the label when you buy the seed packet or you buy the transplant, or just go online and look it up. It'll tell you if it's a determinate plant. So a determinate plant gets to a set height, 2 feet, 3 feet, stops growing, all the flowers come out, and then it produces its fruit, and then it dies off, and it doesn't continue to grow. So the determinate varieties are great for containers because they're compact. You can put them in May. They go through the thing. You put more in July. You can put them back in August, and they're just small. And you can get, big sized tomatoes. You can get tiny cherry tomatoes. I had a couple in the garden. You can also grow dwarf tomatoes that may only get to this size, and that works too with less light.
What do you recommend for an apartment balcony?
That would go, what do you recommend? I keep forgetting to repeat the question. What do you recommend for an apartment balcony? If it's getting 8 hours of sun, you can grow just about anything. It just depends on the size. You can grow cucumbers, zucchini, squash. But what you would do in that case is you want to get the bush variety cucumbers so they don't vine out, they stay compact. The bush variety squash and zucchini, they stay compact. I would grow pepper plants. They grow really well. You want about a 5-gallon or 20-liter container for a single pepper plant. You can put 2 pepper plants in a 10-gallon or 40-liter. You can grow all kinds of herbs. You can grow every kind of herb, really. You can do the basil. There's a lot you can do in there. And again, I would encourage you to take notes, see what works, and adapt that way.
Looks like we can do some pests.
Pests, yeah.
No, pests, yeah.
Yeah, so every garden is going to have its own disease and its own pests. And there's a couple kinds of different pests that are pretty prevalent. If you ever see that white butterfly, I used to call it a moth. I get corrected. It's a butterfly, but it's not cute like a butterfly. It flies around psychotically. It lays eggs all over your leafy greens. You get green worms, you get holes. So you have to know when the pests are showing up. So you might have seen some of that white fabric over my pots. That's to keep the moth from landing on those leafy greens. So the first thing is to kind of talk to people about what disease and pests come into your area, and then you plan ahead for them. So for the chewing worms, you can use neem oil, you can use different dusts. That's up to you. I try and stay organic with those type of chemicals. I don't worry about chemical fertilizers, but neem oil works really well for that. Also on tomato plants, you get something called, you get the spots on these on your green leaves. It'll have a spot and there'll be a brown dot in there and then a yellow ring. It might be leaf spot, it might be early blight. That comes pretty regularly in Maryland. I spray that with hydrogen peroxide, a diluted spray. Don't make that spray off what I'm saying today. Research it. But you want to do 6-part water, 1 part hydrogen peroxide, and you spray the tomato leaves about every 7 days. That kind of cleans and sterilizes them. And I haven't been getting those diseases in my garden. So the whole strategy with pest and disease is to make sure you're preemptive. Start 2 weeks early. The other thing that zucchini get are vine borers, and they're moths that lay eggs. The larvae crawl into the stem. They kill out your zucchini when it's producing. You can do a couple of things. They usually come around June and July. You can plant zucchini and squash after they show up, or you can put an insect dust on the stem, and that tends to help out.
I have one question I borrow that for a second.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you know of any really good resources, like maybe a YouTube channel or someone
I don't know.
who might be able to give some info, like if people are feeling like want to go and really get a breakdown about all that stuff, where they might go to.
There's my friend Kelly Kim. She has a YouTube channel. So And she's actually coming to visit. Some people might know her. But if you wanted these questions answered, the Rusted Garden, RUSTED, the links will be around. I have probably 1,000 videos, so you can find just about anything you want. Like you can find the recipe for the hydrogen peroxide spray. But anytime you're going to try a new spray, anything new in a garden, test spray a couple of leaves, wait 48 hours, see if there's any damage, because it's going to vary garden to garden.
We have another question. Once you get vegetables out, can you repurpose seeds and plant them?
Once you get vegetables out, can you repurpose seeds and replant them? Absolutely. I do that with my tomato plants, with my pepper plants, zucchini, squash. What you have to do for zucchini, squash, cucumbers, you're usually picking them when they're small and tender, but you have to let them grow really large. Like a zucchini will get this big. A cucumber will go from green to about this size. It'll turn orange. You have to let the seeds mature, but you can cut out the seeds, let them dry, and you can use them. And then there's ways that you can save pepper seeds and tomato seeds. And it's a good way to save money. And if you collect seeds of different varieties, then you can go and trade online with people. So it's a good way to kind of set up some social support.
Can you please just go over again how to transition seed starter plants to the outdoor element?
So the question's a good question. If you're growing seeds indoors, they're not used to the sun, the wind, the cold, or anything like that. And the UV rays of the suns will kill them. So how do you transition those seeds that you start or plant you grow indoors to the outdoors? And well, I think we need this microphone. Slowly. So you saw the plants that were sitting on my porch. They were transitioned over probably 7 days. There's not an exact recipe because today it's cloudy. So if you had 7 days of cloudiness, you could just put them out and they'll probably be okay. But what you want to do is put them out 15 minutes the first day, let them get full sun, bring them back inside. And then the second day, 30 minutes. And then the third day, 45 minutes. If you don't do that, your leaves are going to get bleached. It's going to look like they're damaged. And if the sun kills off the stem, you're going to lose your plant.
This is a question I've had a lot, actually. Will seeds from the supermarket work?
Will seeds from the supermarket work?
Supermarket food, sorry.
Supermarket food. Well, and a supermarket too. So you can save money. If you go to the dried bean section and you buy any of those beans or peas, they grow. And they're usually $1.99 or $2.99 for like 200 seeds versus paying $2 for 30 seeds. So that works. When you're buying, like, say, peppers and you cut out the seeds, those pepper plants are usually hybrids. So you can grow those seeds, but they don't always grow the exact form of that pepper plant. And hybrids are when gardeners cross-pollinate something, and it takes a long time before it becomes sort of the heirloom plant, where you'll get, how do I want to say that? You want to be able to plant a seed and get the same exact plant year after year after year. That doesn't happen with hybrids. So often if you're doing that with grocery store vegetables, you don't get the exact plant that you want.
And does that vary between organic or non-organic, or is it the same?
No. So yeah, organic is just how the plants are grown. Hybrid it's really amazing. I mean, it's gardeners or horticulturists, or there's probably another technical name, but they spend years of taking pollen from one tomato plant to another plant and crossing it to create these new varieties. And they're called hybrids, and it's natural, it's safe. People confuse that with genetically modified organisms. They are modified, but by nature, like bees and stuff like that. So it's really cool.
I would like to talk more about what you guys are doing in the farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm a new board member. You probably have better experience, but maybe, we'll have you come in. But I mean, one of the things that attracted me to it, do you need one of these?
I think, yeah.
That attracted me to the farm is that it's 6.5 acres and it's the last of kind in Colombia. And it's really being used to teach people how to have gardens. And it's just kind of this entry point where people can come in, they can volunteer, they can learn, they can share, but they're learning how to grow food, eat healthy. And that's why I got involved. And this is actually my first year.
We want to help the environment. We want to empower people to feel like they can make a difference in addressing climate change and in what they can do at home amongst the busy work life and personal life. What can you do to live a healthy life and also support the environment and also connect with other people in your community? One of the most incredible things about gardening and spending time in nature are the relationships you form with other people who share the similar interests. Gardening is super fun. It's even more fun if you're doing it with other people who are learning with you, who are engaging with you and meeting people of different backgrounds who are growing different foods. A lot of our garden spaces are based on the idea that people come out with minimal to no experience. A lot of the people on our board don't even have a lot of growing experience. We share this vision of having a space where people can come together and learn how to grow food.
Yeah.
So coming into a garden, learning how to go from seed to plate. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're still in the process of creating a community ecology center where people can sign up for classes and workshops and volunteer and do all sorts of things. And it's been a really incredible journey since we first protected the property Freetown Farm just under 2 years ago.
Right.
We protected it from ever being developed. It's an entirely organic farm. We're not spraying anything. Everything that we've been doing is volunteer. It's people in the community who have come out and learned with us. My background is not in environmental sciences. I'm also learning to garden right now. I have my little containers. I realized that I tried growing tomatoes indoors in a basement apartment with grow lights, and I did not put them outside. They didn't do so great, but now I'll do better. It was still, now I know. Yeah. So it's really cool to see everyone's journeys as they happen through or the Rusted Garden or CEI. We really just want to get people as involved with the environment, with gardening, as much as possible.
Yeah. I think the beauty of Freetown Farm is exactly what you said. It's very diverse of people and very diverse of how we're trying to grow things. And there's all these different gardens set up. There's going to be 2 greenhouses, and you can obviously volunteer, but you can kind of wander around and kind of get lost there. And that's the whole idea of kind of blending into the nature, being part of nature, seeing what's going on. I think, today, part of what we're talking about is how you can have a garden. If you have kids, I learned how to garden from my grandfather, and it's actually in my book, the first page. He would come when I was in 2nd grade wearing a blue jacket, can of lime, a bag of tomato plants, and he just showed me how to have a garden. And that stuck with me. Of course, I hated weeding and doing all that stuff as a kid, but that stuck with me. So when I finally got space, I've been doing this for 20 years. If you have a chance to teach your kids that food doesn't come from the grocery store, the radishes grow in the ground, that's a wonderful thing to do too, because a lot of times people don't know where their food's coming from.
Yeah, it's also incredibly empowering to actually take control of that aspect of your life, which is something that most people never experience. You just go to Giant, you go to Whole Foods, you go to wherever to get your food, and being able to see it grow and have the control of that and really feel like you have control of it, especially with COVID and all of the things happening in the world, really feeling like you have control of something that important is really powerful.
It matters. And it's like when we started, you need sun, temperature, water, those 5 things that plants need, but they need the gardener, and that's what you get to do. I just want to grab these radishes. So you came here early and actually had some of these. One of the cool things about a garden is if you eat radishes or peas directly from the ground, wash them. Or peas off, yeah, we didn't wash them, but it was okay because it's organic, I knew. Or peas right off the vine. There's that level of sweetness and sugar and taste that you can't get even at a farmer's market, because once these are picked, within that 24-hour period, the sugars convert to starches in most vegetables, and it's just a different taste. They still taste good, but they don't taste like fresh picked. Same with your herbs. When you have to buy them kind of pre-cut and stuff like that, they're just not the quality of going out pulling basil, thyme, oregano, chives,
This is great.
up there.
And lastly, I would like you talk to them, because most of them speak Spanish, but there are a few who speak English, about your relation with Seda and Salta. I know that it's not you personally, but your family.
Bueno, yo soy Verónica Adler, yo fui a la escuela argentina y mi mamá está muy metida con la escuela argentina, ella creo que está en el board de directores. Y yo soy argentina, mi familia es de la Argentina, y el poder ayudar a una comunidad indígena en Salta, en un momento tan difícil, de una manera tan importante, el poder ayudar a la gente, ayudar que puedan crecer su propia comida, es increíble, es tan importante, y además de hacer una cosa de Zoom acá en Maryland, a poder ayudar a gente en otra parte del mundo, completamente otra parte del mundo, es increíble. Y el trabajo que está haciendo SEDA para ayudar a comunidades argentinas es estupendo, es increíble todo, y estamos tan agradecidos de poder apoyar este programa, y sí, va a ser un gran éxito, y con suerte vamos a hacer otros talleres, vamos a hacer otras cosas parecidas a esto, más específicas. Gary hizo un chiste antes de que podría estar 1 hora y media hablando solo de tomates, y es cierto, hay muchos niveles de todo esto, y si es solo una cosita chiquita que tienes en el balcón o tu jardín entero, hay muchos niveles, así que queremos hacer más de estos talleres, queremos conectar más con ustedes, y queremos ayudar a estas comunidades todo lo que podemos. Así que muchísimas gracias a ustedes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Enjoyed it very, very much. We'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much.